We can worship according to Yahweh's word, or we can worship according to man's tradition.
Emperor Constantine, a sun worshiper, solidified the change from Sabbath to Sunday. In the first 300 years of the New Testament, the church made hundreds of changes in doctrine.
It's time that we follow Scripture and not the traditions of man. Hey, this is Pastor Randy. I'd like to welcome you to Shattering Traditions, where today we have a very special program. We're going to be talking about this myth of Yehovah. But before that, I want to introduce a very special guest, Elder Don Esposito. It's just terrific to have you with us. I think, what was it, 2016?
Yes. We
were together, and just wonderful to see you again. For the audience, tell us a little bit about yourself. We all know you're from Israel, but where your ministry is, how long you've lived in Israel?
Yes, well, we kind of come through the same line through the Duggar organization in Church of God going back to the 1800s. And I come through the Worldwide Church of God line at that time. And after that, it was in the, I guess, the early to mid-90s came to the truth of the name. And in 1997, the Heavenly Father took me over to Israel, and we've been there about 20 years doing ministry in Israel. And one of the blessings I feel being over there is we've worked a lot with archaeology. And, you know, you hear a lot, everybody that loves the Bible loves Israel. And being over there, we're able to verify a lot of things, whether they're true, whether they're not true, whether things you're hearing in the news are true or not. So it's really been a blessing. It's been a blessing to be there, bring groups over there, and host a feast every year. So that's pretty much what we've been doing over there.
Yeah, well, we're good. You know, again, it's just such a privilege to have you here with us today. And you know, it's interesting. I didn't know you moved to Israel in 1997. I moved here from California to Missouri in the same year.
Wow.
So yeah, probably should have moved to Israel.
You're always welcome.
I've been there twice, and it's just a phenomenal place. I mean, there's just nothing like going to Israel.
Yes.
Well, today, you know, we want to talk about this Yehovah name, and of course, the title here is Yehovah Nonsense, and we'll probably explain why we named it that here in just a few moments. But real quick, I just want to explain why we're talking about this. There's a certain Karaite Jew here this last few years who's been pushing this name Yehovah, and he's convinced a lot of people, and it's certainly sad. And we won't mention him by name, of course, but we want to sort of dispel many of the myths with Yehovah and explain why this is not the name we find in Scripture and why we use Yahweh, and we both use that name here.
Yes.
So I want to begin by asking you, because one of the things we often hear is in Israel, most of the Jews say that it's not Yahweh, that it's Yehovah or some other myth. And you know, you live in Israel, you've lived in Israel for many, many years. Is that true? Do the Jews in Israel support Yehovah? Do the Jews reject this name Yahweh that we use?
It's absolutely not. And let me tell you, in my 20 years there, we lived in the old city of Jerusalem for about 5.5 years. I met many rabbis over there, used to go and have conversations with them, know many, many archaeologists, scholars from the universities, tour guides that work with us. So over the years, I literally hundreds, if not thousands of people in the academic world that I've met. And of course, not universally, but I would say well overall, more than 50 to 60% of the people there believe the name is Yahweh. And when I say that, that's pretty high, because remember, the Jews don't use the name. So a lot of people just say, it's not that they don't believe it's Yahweh, they just say we don't know. But there's at least 50 to 60% of the people that absolutely believe it's Yahweh, and maybe another 20% that will say it probably is, but we can't be sure. And I don't know if I've ever met anybody that uses the name Jehovah or Yehovah, because it's so nonsensical to use that name. And one of the things that I'm seeing with this is the problem is that in the internet age, people are forgetting, they're not going back to the source. So it's real easy to come out and say, ooh, you know, there's 1,000 manuscripts, or there's 1,000 this, that are a couple hundred years old. Matter of fact, in Israel, if you went to Israel and you told somebody that you had something really old that was 1,000 years old, they turn around and walk away. 1,000 years is nothing. You know, over here in America, that's really old if something's 100 years old. It has to be 2,000 years old to even be looked at in Israel.
I remember that when we went for the tour, where we've been there twice, and you did the last tour with us, which was, again, phenomenal. But yeah, we said the same thing. You know, if it's 1,000 years old, we don't even want to look at it. We'll just pass by, because most of the major archaeological sites are 2,000 years or older.
Yes.
So no, you're right, and I've experienced that myself.
So the reality of it is, right? Have somebody, if anybody ever tries to use the name Yehovah, whatever, just ask them, show me something that is more than 1,000 years old that clearly shows the name Yehovah. And they can't, because there is none. And I guess we'll get into it here with the vowel pointing and all that. But there is absolutely nothing. So you could show me 1,000,000 manuscripts from the last, couple of hundred years that are vowel pointed in a certain way, but that proves nothing of the name in ancient times.
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting too, because this certain Karaite Jew, when he first began, it was 1, 2, 3, 4 documents supposedly finding this revealed name. And now it's over 1,000 documents, and now it's no longer a secret. He's approaching it differently, just showing the volume of evidence. But the reality is, these are all Masoretic. So let's talk about that just. Oh, you know what? Before that, I want to mention Yossi, is our tour guide, or archaeologist we had last time in Israel. And when we were on Mount Carmel, beautiful place, I said, we were, and by the way, this man was a graduate of the Hebrew University. He's been with the Israeli Antiquities Authority for many, many years. And I said that the way we pronounce the name Yahweh, is that right? And I was blown away at his response. He says, not only is it right, and again, Yossi's been in Israel for decades. Yeah. And he says, not only is it right, but he says, this is how my Yemenite wife would pronounce the name. And he said, Yemenite is closer to the biblical Hebrew. Matter of fact, he said that he, along with many other Jews, struggle with the W pronunciation of the Wa, because they use the Vav today, or the V sound. So Yossi, the archaeologist, a graduate of Hebrew University, been with the Israeli Antiquities Authority for many, many years. Has been in Israel since a child, I believe.
Four years old, but fourth generation. Yeah, his family comes from there.
So, there's just a great preponderance of evidence supporting Yahweh. So let's explain real quickly the evidence that these people use to support Yehovah. So there's many, many documents. They fall under what we would call the Masoretic manuscripts, or documents, or codices, and including things like the Leningrad and Aleppo Codex. And we find their vowel pointing. And the vowel pointing, the Masoretes introduced to basically preserve the pronunciation of the Hebrew. Now, because the Jews had a reverence maybe for the name.
Yes.
They did not want people pronouncing the name, so to prevent that, they would use the vowel points from Adonai. And they would then, and actually you can see that on the screen here with Yahweh's name, the vowel points of Adonai. Now, there is a difference between the schwa and the compound schwa between the two, but that's just because one's a guttural, one's not a guttural. It's just a very simple rule of Hebrew grammar. The other thing too is, well, you know what? We'll wait on that, because I want to. But that's where this name comes from. It's from the vowel pointing, and as you pointed out, the Masoretic documents are not that old when we really compare documents from antiquity. Most of these documents, actually the oldest, I believe, is still the late 9th century.
Yep.
So, did I miss anything there?
Well, no, but here's where there's, I guess you can call it fake news that these people want to preponder, because they make it sound like in this Aleppo Codex, this secret manuscript that's come out, we found the name and it's there and it's vowel pointed. And that's just not the truth of the matter, because I believe in the Aleppo Codex, there's only 7 times that it's vowel pointed that way. And if you look, whether it's the Aleppo Codex or the Leningrad, it doesn't make a difference. Any of the vowel pointing of the Masoretic text, what you'll find is that there's all different types of vowel pointing for the name. So, because sometimes they're using Adonai, which is probably most of the time, but even when they're using Adonai, sometimes the holam, the dot, they're not putting there because they don't want to put all the vowels all the time so people don't accidentally say the name Yahweh. So sometimes they leave that out, and then other times they're using Eloah or they're using Elohim. So if you actually go through the manuscripts, and the Aleppo Codex also, for the Torah, that's the most important part of the Tanakh, most of it is missing. They do not have, from around the middle of Genesis to the second part or third part of Deuteronomy, it's gone. So we have no idea what's even over there because they don't have the manuscript. But if you take all the manuscripts they have from the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad, and you look, you'll find, I believe in, maybe you know, I think it's 7 different vowel pointings that they have. And it's all mixed. So there's no way that somebody can come out, no matter who you are, and try to say that from those manuscripts that are vowel pointed, you can come up with the name Yehovah simply because 7 times it's in the Aleppo Codex and maybe 30 times it's in the Leningrad Codex.
No, you're right. I mean, there's different spellings. Matter of fact, I wanted to show the audience this. This is the Yehovah Deception booklet. Yes. And maybe we can just put it on the screen there. But anyway, we've spent hundreds of hours researching this booklet. We answer most of the debates. But anyway, we actually bring that up. You're right. In the Leningrad Codex, there is 7 different spellings from what I understand. And I'll just go through some of those. Yehovah is one. And we're going to use the wow or the W here. The Yehovah, that's another one. Yehovah, that's another pronunciation. Yahweh, that's another pronunciation. And again, you're talking about removing the holum or the O sound. That's where that the removal of the O comes from. Yehovah, of course, now the holum's back in, and Yahweh. Now, that's 7 different pronunciations in addition to, or actually Yehovah is there, Yehovah, and Yehovah is closer to the biblical Hebrew. We'll talk about that later. But, you know, and for me, this is one of the big reasons why Yehovah can't possibly be the name, because if we're going to use the Masoretic documents to support the pronunciation of Yehovah, how do we deal with these other pronunciations? Because the reality is no other scholarship, no other manuscripts besides these Masoretic documents support the name Yehovah.
No. but
they also support 6 other pronunciations in the Leningrad Codex. So how do you explain that?
And they're, on the opposition side, what they're saying is that the scribe accidentally put this in by accident. So even like he's putting in the false pronunciation all these thousands of times, but then accidentally he just put the right pronunciation. And it's ludicrous when you think about it, because in Israel, we know scribes. We bring groups to professional scribes who've been scribes for 30 years writing Torah scrolls, and they show you exactly how they do it, how they get the ink. And when you're doing a Torah scroll, you can't have any mistakes in it. Now, if it's a regular word, sometimes they can scrape the word off. If it's the sacred name, you can't do that. You know, that's why even in an old manuscript, they will not throw it away, because they won't throw anything away that has the sacred name in it. So they might have to cut it out and put another piece in it. But to think that a scribe would have X amount of mistakes in there and not know it, and then put that out, and then, you know, thousands of years later, somebody's going to come and say, "Oh, I found this pronunciation here." And plus, is he getting in the mind of the scribe, knowing exactly what the scribe did? It's just the theory really is weak.
Well, you know what? I want to explore that for just a few moments. Again, in the Yehovah Deception article we have, our booklet, we list from the Talmud specific requirements for the scribes.
Yes.
Let me just read a few of these. The scribe must be a learned, pious Jew who has undergone special training certification. So, you know, it's not a nobody. He's gone through education. All materials must conform to strict specifications. The scribe must pronounce every word out loud before copying it from the correct text. A scribe may not write even one letter into a Torah scroll by heart. Rather, he must have a second kosher scroll open before him at all times. A Torah scroll is disqualified if even a single letter is added.
Exactly.
A Torah scroll is disqualified if even a single letter is deleted.
Exactly.
Every letter must have sufficient white space surrounding it. If a single letter is so marred that it cannot be read or resembles another letter, or the result is a hole, the entire scroll is invalidated. I'll just read 2 more here. The scribe must put precise space between words. The scribe must not alter the design of the sections and must conform to particular line lengths and paragraphs. And this last one here is really important, and you've already sort of hit on it, but it says a Torah scroll in which any mistake has been found cannot be used.
Yeah, exactly.
And a decision regarding its restoration must be made within 30 days or it must be buried. So that's how they dispose of these scrolls. They would bury the scrolls. Exactly. But here we see that not even a single mistake. And again, these were very stringent scribes. You know, they took very, very careful care, you know, with these manuscripts. And to think that they would have missed all these mistakes, as you say, is nonsensical, it's irrational. And for me, that is one of the main reasons why this theory that these scribes accidentally preserved the name by inserting these vowel points is really insane.
And again, this is one man's insanity who's coming up with this, because when you actually read the records in the Talmud and the Mishnah, they're not hiding the fact that they're putting the vowel pointings from Adonai and from Elohim in there purposely, so that somebody will not pronounce the name Yahweh. So it's just one man's theory that he's coming up, and really on very, very weak ground.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that, and that's an important point too, because we know from scholarship that the Jews stopped pronouncing the name about the 3rd century. Now, some will say they continued, some Jews continued it, but the majority, as I understand it, stopped pronouncing the name about the 3rd century when Simon the Just or Simon the Righteous died. Matter of fact, what's really amazing is we find confirmation of this within the Talmud. Let me read that real quickly here. I think I have the quote here. This is from the Babylonian Talmud. It's within the footnotes. It says, Tosef Soda 38a suggests that the ineffable name could be pronounced only when there were some indication that the Shekinah rested on the sanctuary when Simon the Righteous died, with many indications that such glory was no more enjoyed. His brother no more dared to utter the ineffable name. So we see here that the Jews stopped using the name or uttering the name around the 3rd century. Matter of fact, here's what the Encyclopedia Britannica says. It says after the Babylonian exile, 6th century BC, and especially from the 3rd century BC on, the Jews ceased to use the name Yahweh for 2 reasons. As Judaism became a universal rather than merely local religion, the more common noun Elohim, meaning God, tended to replace Yahweh to demonstrate the universal sovereignty of Israel's God over all others. At the same time, the divine name was increasingly regarded as too sacred to be uttered. It was thus replaced vocally in the synagogue ritual by the Hebrew word Adonai, my Lord, which was translated as Kyrios, Lord, in the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Hebrew Scriptures. So scholarship acknowledges that the Jews stopped pronouncing the name starting about the 6th century. And I think I can understand that from the standpoint that they just came out of Babylonian exile.
Yes.
They were being criticized, by the Babylonians, I'm sure, and they wanted to honor Yahweh's name, and the best way they knew how to do that was just not to pronounce it.
One point on that also, although they stopped pronouncing the name publicly, the name was never lost. That we do know from the records that whether it's on Yom Kippur, the priest saying it, or the high priest telling to the next high priest, and I've had this confirmed personally by myself, by rabbis in Jerusalem. And I know a man there who's a Orthodox priest for about 45 years. He speaks fluent Aramaic and Hebrew. And he confirmed to me, because he knows all the top rabbis in Israel, that 100% he believes the name is Yahweh, because he got it from the rabbis. And that's what they say, that generation to generation. So think of like Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, right? That something as important as the name of the Creator, you're not going to go your whole life and not tell your child. So this is priest to priest to priest. And that's what he says. There's never been a break. So even though they're not pronouncing it publicly, that they never lost the pronunciation. And that's what the top rabbis in Israel believe the name is Yahweh.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, because there are some people who say it's an inevitable name, that nobody pronounced it, and it's been lost. Scholarship, some scholars do say that or confirm that, and yet we do know that they did preserve the name. So no, I agree with you, and I think that's a very important point to make, that the Jews did not lose the pronunciation. They simply stopped pronouncing it publicly, and again, it was for the purpose of to reverence the name, and that's one thing I like to point out, because I don't think the Jews are doing what they're doing out of an irreverence for Yahweh or for the name. They think they're doing right.
Exactly. And there's been times when I've been with them and I've said the name and they've kindly asked me, please, can you not say that name in front of me? And I say, sure, I'm sorry, because I don't want to offend them. But it's just proof that that's the name, because if it wasn't the name, they wouldn't be offended by it. Yeah. They certainly wouldn't be offended if I was saying Yehovah or Jehovah. But they are offended if you say the name Yahweh. Yeah.
So that's a very important point, though. And again, you've been in Israel since, what, 97?
Yep.
You've heard it. You've talked to rabbis. You've talked to experts. You've talked to many Jews. They've all confirmed it. I've been to Israel twice. I've talked to certain archaeologists and certain people there, Jews, and they've confirmed it for me. And so this notion that the Jews will not confirm the name Yahweh in Israel is just, again, it's just nonsense. And
it's just not true. And I'll tell you something. Myself, coming from Church of God background, I was not brought up with the sacred name. So when I studied it, I had no preconceived ideas. It didn't matter to me what it was. I just wanted to find it the truth. And I studied it for probably close to 10 years because I kept getting conflicting reports on how to say the name. But after that time, and everything that I've studied historically and seen from Israel, I can say 100% that some form of that. I don't think anybody can say 100% that definitely the name, because we're speaking English, we're not even speaking Hebrew. But some form, it's a 2-syllable name of some form of Yahweh is how it would be pronounced.
And I think you bring up a valid point too. With we can't be 100%. I know when I go to Israel and I listen to the Israelis speak, there are certain sounds I can't make speaking English and not being an Israeli. The other thing too to keep in mind is just the overwhelming evidence we find from scholarship. When you really look into this, it's amazing the preponderance of evidence we find. And let me just read a few. And I don't know if you have any of these to read, but of course you have the booklet here in front of you. Maybe so they don't hear me speak. Turn to page 5 in the Yehovah booklet if you want to. And I'll read a few here, and then maybe you can read a few, because it's important for people to realize, we're not making this up.
Yes.
We're not making these claims that we can't support through scholarship. We can support them through scholarship. Now, for me, one of the very best quotes is from the Judaica, and it says this. It says, in the early ages, when the consonantal text of the Bible was supplied with the vowel points to facilitate its correct traditional rendering or reading, and again, that was done by the vowel point or by the Masoretes. It says the vowel points for Adonai with one variation, schwa, short e, with the first yod or w of YHWH instead of the hetaf pathic, short a, under the alphabet Adonai was used for YHWH, thus pronounced the form Yehovah. When Christian scholars of Europe first began to study Hebrew, they did not understand what this really meant, and they introduced the hybrid Jehovah. And this is such an incredible quote, because this is the Judaica. This is one of the most renowned encyclopedias within a Jewish scholarship we find. And here it says that the Masoretes, with the one exception of, again, adding the schwa or the compound schwa, it is the vowel points from Adonai. And it says here Yehovah. Of course, this certain Karaite Jew, and others will say it's Yehovah. And we'll talk about the V. I don't want to really get into that right now, but we know it wasn't a V, it was a W, and we'll see evidence for that later. I want to read one more, and then maybe you can pick out one or two, and you can just sort of share with the audience here. But the next one is the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, and it says there the Tetragrammaton, or four-lettered name, which occurs 6,823 times, is by far the most frequent name of God in the Bible. It is now pronounced Adonai by the Church Father Theodore. It records that the Samaritans pronounced it as it says here, IABE, and Origen transcribed it as IAE, both pointing to an original vocalization at Yahweh, or it says Yahweh here, but again, we know that it should be W with the wow and not the vav. I don't know if there's any others. I mean, I could go on and on. We have 2 or 3 pages of just reference after reference after reference here. And, I do this because I just think it's important for people to realize, again, we're not making this up. We're not making claims that we can't support through scholarship. Scholarship overwhelmingly confirms Yahweh.
Yes. And I think it's important to understand that, like we said in the beginning, anciently, that name Yehovah or Jehovah, it was never, ever even thought of by anybody until around 12th, 13th century. Yeah. And it was really Christians that were misinterpreting as they're getting Hebrew manuscripts.
Or they're taking the Hebrew, they're finding the vowel points from Adonai with the Tetragrammaton. They go, oh, okay, what is this? This is Yehovah. And then the J comes along, it turns into Jehovah. So yeah, no, it's not real hard to understand once you understand the Hebrew and how that works, and realizing that these original translators of the English Bible did not comprehend what the Jews were doing there.
Yes.
So instead of rendering it as Yahweh, because you don't find Yahweh in the Hebrew, and that's one of the, not within the Masoretic Hebrew, or manuscripts, you just see and then beyond the Masoretic manuscripts, you just have the Yod He Waw He.
Yes.
There are no vowel points. So it doesn't support Yehovah or Yahweh. Of course, we know through other manuscripts and records it is Yahweh. And we'll talk more about that as we go on here. But I don't know if there's any other sources maybe you want to share, Reed. And
here's one. Jehovah in that form was unknown to the ancient Israelites. In fact, Hebrew scholars say that Jehovah would have been impossible according to the strict principles of Hebrew vocalization. The God of Israel was known by a name approximately rendered into English as Yahweh. A book about the Bible, George Simpson, page 247. So this is why Yehovah is nonsensical. Because if you look like here, you see the holam, the little dot that's over the O, and that comes from the Masoretics. So the Masoretics have the vowel pointing. So with the vowel pointing, you could use that dot instead of a wav. But if you don't have the vowel pointing system, you have to use the wav. So when we're looking at, let's compare the Masoretic text to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest text in the world that we have. So the Masoretic, let's take the word Elohim. They would not have the wav in the place there. They only have a dot. Where in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have to have the wav, because without it, how would you know that a dot's supposed to go in there? So it's the same with other names, like Yaakov. The same thing. They have a dot there instead of the wav, but in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you have the wav. So my point is, according to this, according to when you're comparing them, if the name, the Tetragrammaton, Yod He Wav He, was supposed to be Yehovah or Yehovah with 3 syllables, right? Without the dot pointing system in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we should see a second wav there. It should be Yod He Wav Wav He. You don't see it. So that's why they say it's nonsensical, because it's impossible with that, because in the proponents are actually saying, they say that, well, if you look in the Bible, all the names start with Yeho. Well, Yeho already has Yod, He, Wav. So you only have one letter left of a Tetragrammaton. And yet then they're saying the Va is another Wav and another He. So it's not a Tetragrammaton anymore. It becomes a 5-letter root word or a 5-letter word that's being used there. And again, according to the Hebrew, it's impossible. So would I say anybody that wants to look this up, maybe it sounds a little technical, just take the Masoretic, take the Dead Sea Scrolls and compare them, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
I think you bring up a very good point there, because the Yod He Waw He, the 4 letters within Yahweh's name, those are also known as vowel consonants within the Hebrew language, and they can serve as both vowels and consonants.
Yes.
So when we have the vowel there, that can serve as like an O or an U or W.
Yes.
So you're right, and we see examples of that within the Dead Sea Scrolls and variances between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic documents. And that is certainly one way to verify that it is not Yehovah, or like you said, a 4-letter word, or a 5-letter word. It's a 4-letter word. We know that. Tetragrammaton means 4 letters within the Greek language. Scholarship understands this.
Yes.
And again, speaking about scholarship, the proof is just overwhelming. The proof is just absolutely overwhelming that Yahweh is the name, or close to it, and Yehovah is nonsensical, it's irrational, it's not correct based on Hebrew grammar. And I'm not going to read any more quotes, but I just wanted to sort of read. And again, I would encourage the audience out there, if you want this booklet, if you want to really understand this, request this booklet, go online. You can read it there too. There's so much information within this booklet. We provide so many scholarly references, but let me just read quickly just the references. We got the Catholic Encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Encyclopedia Americana, Making of a Contemporary Translation, the Erdman's Bible Dictionary, The Journey from Text to Translation by Dr. Paul Wegner, which is a really, really great book.
Wow.
Revised Standard Bible, the Preface, the Encyclopedia Lutheran Church, the Emphasized Bible, the Insight on Scriptures, which, let me read that real quickly, because you're probably familiar with the Insight on Scriptures. This is a Jehovah's Witness publication. And here's what it says. This is Jehovah is the best known English pronunciation of the divine name, although Yahweh is favored by most Hebrew scholars. The oldest Hebrew manuscripts present the name in the form of 4 consonants, as you were mentioning, commonly called the Tetragrammaton, from Greek tetra, meaning 4, and gramma, letter. These 4 letters, written from right to left, are YHWH, and may be translated into English as YHWH, or YHVH, using the vav instead of the vowel there. And again, that's from Insight in the Scriptures, Volume 2, page 5, under Jehovah, Watchman, Bible Tract Society. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses, they know, which is remarkable. They know that the name is not Jehovah. They know that based on Hebrew scholars that the name is Yahweh. And, and if anybody would have an axe to grind and try to twist the facts from an academic standpoint, it would be the Jehovah's Witnesses. And they freely admit, based on Hebrew scholarship, the name is not Jehovah.
And
the
Hebrew
name is
grammar.
Yahweh.
Because if you look at the Tetragrammaton here, right? Yod, Hey, Wav, Hey. The way that you would know without the vowel pointing system, when you have a Wav, whether it would be a vowel or a consonant, is where it's placed in the word, right?
Exactly.
So now, if this is going to be a vowel, it would have to be between 2 consonants. So you would have to have or the first Yod is just by itself, which you wouldn't have. So as you have the word Yah, which we know it's Yah, there's 68 references to it, the Wav being next, the first vowel of the next syllable, it can't be a vowel. It would have to be a consonant because where it's placed there. So that's why so
what you're saying is it would essentially be based on their reasoning. It'd be YEHVVAH.
Exactly.
It would have to be.
But the way that 4 letters are there, you know where the Wav is placed, that it has to be a consonant. It can't be a vowel because of where it's placed in the word. Now, if there was another consonant there, if there was 2 Vavs, then you would say, well, 1 Vav is going to be a consonant, 1 Vav is going to be a vowel. But because of the placing, you would know. And that's why I say, don't look at Masoretic texts. Don't look at things with vowel pointings that are only, several hundred or 1,000 years old. Look in the ancient texts. Look in the ancient writings. And actually, one way, because we talked about this a little while ago, that in ancient times, how do you know that Yod He Vav He would be Yahweh? Well, the way we know it is when you look in the Greek, when you look in the Samaritan language, when you look in all the ancient manuscripts that are not Hebrew, that you can vowel point them, the name comes out to Yahweh. Yeah. So before the internet age, in the last 10, 15 years, and all these exotic new ways that people are coming out with things, there was never, I mean, like I said, almost all scholars, just like you read there, say that the name was pronounced as Yahweh because we know it. One thing that they found in Soleb, Sudan, they actually found a plaque that's there that was from Amenhotep III. This is the pharaoh 1 generation after the Exodus, right? So you better believe you read the book of Exodus, they know Yahweh's name there, right? And this is only 1 generation later, 1400 BC. And they have the name Yahweh vowel pointed as Yahweh. So it's like, what more do you need to know? I mean, if the actual Pharaoh, the next Pharaoh after the Exodus, where Yahweh did all these miracles there, he is putting this inscription, and it's saying, to the people of Yahweh, and its vowel point is Yahweh. It's like, wow, that's not something that's coming from a couple hundred years ago, from some manuscript of the Masoretics. This is something that's going all the way back to the time of Moses and Joshua.
Yeah, that's really remarkable. And I want to go back real quickly and talk about the vowel pointing and another indication why it's not Yehovah. One of the things we see in the Hebrew is when Adonai and the Tetragrammaton appear closely, and sometimes they appear side by side, the Jews would do something differently. Instead of using the vowel points from Adonai, they would instead use the vowel points from Elohim, and you can see examples of this within Hebrew. And that way it's not going to read Adonai, Adonai, because that's generally what they would do is they came across the Tetragrammaton and Yod He Waw He, they would read Adonai because they saw the vowel points of Adonai. But in those cases where Adonai and Yahweh appear side by side, they would again use the vowel points of Elohim then in reference to the YHWH or Yahweh. So they would read Adonai Elohim, or the reverse if it was a reverse. And to me, that's one of the major indications, because if this is a name, as you pointed out earlier, we find absolutely no scholarship, no PhD, no manuscript, certainly, or no manuscript, period, supporting this Yehovah, except for the manuscript, the Masoretic manuscripts. But then we see these other pronunciations, and we see this instance where if Yahweh and Adonai appear side by side, they would use the vowel points from Elohim. And how do you explain that? I wish I could talk to somebody that was rational. Many people aren't rational when it comes to this. And just ask, how do you explain that? How do you explain the fact that we see different spellings, within most of these manuscripts, as we documented, I believe it's 7 within the Leningrad. And then how do you explain when you come across Yahweh and Adonai where they appear together, that the Jews would change how they vowel pointed that word and use the vowel points from Elohim?
Yes. The first thing you have to do is go to the concept of the importance of the name, right? The name is very important. Today people will say, oh, it doesn't matter what you call the Creator. To these people, it mattered, because even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, right, there wouldn't even change the Paleo-Hebrew to the Babylonian block Hebrew. That's how much the name meant. So the same way here, there's, I think, 112 times the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was taken out in the Masoretic, and they put in the name Adonai because of redundancy. They felt they didn't want the name Yahweh twice, maybe in one sentence or whatever, so they did that. So it's showing you how important it is not to have redundancy in the name, because the name is set apart. So here, when you have the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, that they're vowel pointing as Adonai, and then you have the word Adonai. And I think in Ezekiel, there's many times where they have that, Yahweh.
There
Adonai.
is, and my sovereign or Adonai appears many, many times in the book of Ezekiel.
Exactly. So they don't want it to be Adonai. They don't want redundancy because you're talking about the Creator. So they change the vowel points to Elohim, which proves that the first vowel points are Adonai. Or why would they have to change the vowel points?
I mean, to me, it's one of the smoking guns, along with, again, the other pronunciations. If you're going to use the Masoretic documents solely to base the pronunciation of Yahweh's name on, and yet you have different spellings, how do you choose between the different spellings?
Yes.
Because there's nothing else to compare it to. There's no other benchmark, because there's no other source that confirms Yehovah. And then to make it worse, you have this instance where if Adonai and Yahweh appear together, they switched over to the vowel points of Elohim, and you can see it. It's not a mystery. Scholarship has known this for many, many, many decades. And that's the thing, these folks at the certain Karaite Jew and many who follow him, they'll say things like, or scholarship hasn't noticed this, or they did not know this, or they've known this for decades.
Or they're trying to hide the name.
This is nothing new.
They're not trying to hide the name. It's right in the records of the rabbis that they admit they're doing this because they want to keep the name set apart.
Well, let's move on, because I want to talk about the Vav. Because that's obviously a big point for them. They'll say the Vav. Matter of fact, this person that promotes this name will say that the Vav itself came from the not Aramaic, the Arabic language. The Vav, or the vowel, came from Arabic, and originally it was a Vav. So I mean, again, you've been in Israel since 1997. You know many rabbis. You've certainly have more experience than I do with the Hebrew language. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, let me say, I've never read, I've never met, or heard of anybody who doubts that originally in the original Paleo-Hebrew and the original Hebrew was a Vav. Matter of fact, in any course you take, and whether it's an online course or in Israel, any Hebrew course you take, everybody. So I'm not really sure what's the reasoning behind that, because it's such an established fact. Because even when you look at the Wav as a vowel, the U, or the U sound, you have double U. That's where you get the letter from. It's not double V. It's double U. And the actual paleo picture, of the Wav is a nail. That is the picture of it. So it makes no sense to where he's coming with this. Like it is so understood. And when you go into every Semitic language, okay, now we want to get into the facts of it, not just what people know or understand. Every Semitic language, whether it's Phoenician, whether it's Aramaic, whether it's Arabic, whether it's ancient Hebrew, none of them have a va sound. They think that came from European Sanskrit much later. And even in Persian, the ancient Persian only has a w sound. And it's only later, much later, 1,000 years later, where you get this v sound. So the v sound, it's not even a sound in any ancient Semitic language. It doesn't exist. It's not there.
And to me, that's a very, very important point to recognize that within these Semitic languages, you don't have the V sound.
No.
And, matter of fact, I want to share a quote. I contacted, when we began looking into this, I sent an email to about 20 different professors, all specifically in the field of linguistics, Hebrew linguistics, because it's not enough to simply have a biblical degree of just a general nature. You need to really be a linguist if you're going to speak to this. And so I contacted about 20 different linguists from Stanford, Harvard, and also from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Now, here's the amazing part about it. I think one guy from Stanford replied, said he really knew nothing about this. And I think I had 3 other replies from the Hebrew University, or 4 actually, but 3. And the 3 said, you need to speak with Professor Stephen Fastberg.
Yes.
Now, Stephen Fastberg also replied to my inquiry. And I want to read what he says. And before that, though, matter of fact, we have some of his credentials listed within this booklet, I believe. But what's amazing about Stephen Fastberg is his credentials. He was director of the Orion Institute, a major institute over the Dead Sea Scrolls. He has received his PhD from Harvard, and the guy is just incredible. His credentials are impeccable. And here's what Stephen Fastberg says, if I can find the quote here. It says, there is no doubt that the original sound was W and not V. Sometime during the history of the Hebrew language, there was a shift from W to V in pronunciation, probably already during the Mishnaic period. And this was, again, personal email correspondence that I received from Professor Fastberg. Matter of fact, let me read you the first part of the quote here. He says, the pronunciation he mentioned, that was Yehovah, he says, is a mistake. The Hebrew consonant text is YHWH, and no one really knows how that was pronounced in Old Testament times. And that really did not surprise me, being who he is, a Jew and from the Hebrew University. He says, at a later date, the latter half of the 2nd millennium CE, Masoretes added vowel signs to the consonantal text. Whenever the Tetragrammaton was written, they added the vowel signs of the word Adonai, which means my Lord. There was a taboo on pronouncing the divine name, and one was supposed to read the word Adonai, my Lord. Much later, some started reading the vowel points or vowel signs together with YHWH and came up with the nonsensical word Jehovah or Yehovah.
Yes.
Again, this is a Jew. This is a man with a PhD. This is a man who specializes within the Hebrew language. This is a man who teaches at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. This is, and this is the same guy that 3 other professors, also Hebrew linguistics, referred me to. And this, Professor Fastberg here says, number 1, it's a mistake, and number 2, he says that the word itself is nonsensical. It's irrational, as we see here. No, it's nonsense, and that's what we find from one of the leading scholars, really, throughout this, in the world, in my opinion. And just one more thing about Fastberg is just, if you look at his contributions online, it's phenomenal. For instance, he's contributed to the Encyclopedia Judaica, a grammar of the Palestinian Targum, studies in the syntax of Biblical Hebrew, the Jewish Neo-Aramaic dialect of Kala, I'm assuming how that's pronounced, the language of the Bible, and many other references. So, this man, Professor Fastberg, is very educated, and according to him, Yehovah is a mistake, and it's nonsensical. Well, we've talked a little bit about Yahweh and why we use it, where it's supported. You've already sort of made mention of this, but I want to just reiterate it. We find actually references going back to the 2nd century CE from people like Clement of Alexandria and Theodoret and others. And they heard the name, as history bears out, through the Jews and the Samaritans. And the Jews, again, the Jews never lost the pronunciation. They just would not pronounce it publicly. And there's many references to
and one thing we have to remember is, although the Jews in the 1st century, most of them didn't pronounce the name at that time because they were trying to keep it set apart, the believers did pronounce the name. And a matter of fact, when Yeshua was before the Sanhedrin, and they said, are you the son of Elohim? And he said, you said, I'll tell you more. From here on in, you'll see the Son of Man standing at the right hand of Yahweh. Now, how do we know he said the name Yahweh? We know it because according to Jewish law, if you blasphemed, you would get 39 stripes. If you blasphemed using the name Yahweh, you get the death penalty. And they said it, he's deserving of death. So we knew that Yeshua used the name, and we know the believers did. They did not have this taboo on not using it. Yeah. So when you're seeing 2nd century and 3rd century and 4th century believers saying the name was Yahweh, well, why would we doubt them?
Yeah.
You know, why would we doubt the reference after reference to these people clearly vocalizing the name as Yahweh?
Yeah. And, you know, there's sources that will verify that. The Encyclopedia Judaica, for instance, it says there the true pronunciation of the name YHWH was never lost.
Yes.
Several early Greek writers of the Christian church testify that the name was pronounced Yahweh.
Yes.
And this is from the Encyclopedia Judaica. Just one more source here. It says this is the Encyclopedia Britannica. Again, very well-recognized reference. It says early Christian writers such as Clement of Alexandria in the 2nd century had used the form Yahweh, thus this pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton was never really lost. Greek transcriptions also indicated that YHWH should be pronounced Yahweh. You know, and I could go on. I'll just stop there. The other thing, though, is beyond the early church fathers, we know that Yahweh is also supported in the Gnostic writings. Matter of fact, we see it in the secret book of John within the Greek. And some people, you know, will use that and they'll say, well, why would you ever use a Gnostic writing to justify the name Yahweh? We know historically that the church fathers and the Gnostics, they despised one another. And by the way, we view the Gnostics as heretical as well.
Yes,
you know,
sure.
we're not giving credence to the Gnostic belief because, you know, they had some very strange ideas. But the fact that the church fathers and the Gnostics really despised one another, and yet we find them both acknowledging the name Yahweh.
Yes.
To me, that tells me something. That tells me that this was universally accepted. This was not something just known to the church fathers. This was something known to everybody at this point.
Exactly. You're not
Yahweh's
using it.
name was Yahweh.
Exactly. You're not using it as a reference for doctrine. You're just making a simple fact that these people knew the name was Yahweh because it was universal.
But it's amazing, though, how many people will say, or why would you ever use Gnostic writings to justify or support the name Yahweh, or why not?
Yeah.
These people had no axe to grind. Of course, I'll say also, why would you use a Greek language as if the only language you can use is Hebrew to support a conclusion? The Jews, as we've already read in the Talmud, they had a taboo with pronouncing the name. They would not pronounce the name. This started 3rd century BC. Very, very long tradition. I mean, this tradition was going long before the Masoretes.
Yes.
You know?
And let me just also mention that because sometimes people will say the same thing with the Septuagint, that they'll say, how could you use the Septuagint when the Septuagint uses names like Kurios and Theos, which are pagan names for Elohim? Well, if you go back to the original Septuagint, and I've seen copies of it, they actually had the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the sacred name, in gold letters. So the Kurios and the Theos, those came much, much later when it was copied later. But originally, the people who made the Septuagint were 70, Jewish rabbis, that are putting this together. And they did believe in the sacred name, and they did keep the sacred name set apart. So by going to the Greek sometimes, or other languages that are vowel-pointed, you could see what the name was used. And if it's universally used as Yahweh in every language, then why would we doubt it?
Now, the Septuagint, and I agree, and I think this is a very important point. Matter of fact, I think it was done in Paleo-Hebrew, if I'm right with that. They don't have the vowel points, though.
Yes.
So we can't really confirm Yahweh, although
but we can confirm that the sacred name was important to them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very, very good point.
So when you're going to other Greek writings from them where they do have it in Greek vowel pointed, the name, it gives credence to that fact that it doesn't have to only be written in Hebrew without vowel pointing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, speaking about the Septuagint, they actually found a fragment. This is part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it goes back to 1 BCE, I believe, is a date. Yes. And you actually see within the Greek language, you have the first 3 letters of Yahweh's name, but you certainly have the short form Yah.
Yes.
And that's the thing, they say Yehovah, or based on this manuscript going back, and this is of Leviticus, going back to the Greek Septuagint, we see Yah. We don't see Yeh.
Yes.
We see Yah. Matter of fact, one of the things, another study we've been doing here recently is with the Akkadian tablets, going back to the 5th and 6th centuries. And these were basically Jews that were coming out of Babylonian exile
Yes.
about 20 years after. And one of the remarkable things, matter of fact, I have the book of the professor who did the study with this, and she has documented every tablet. She's transliterated every tablet.
Wow.
And I spoke with a professor from Cambridge, and he confirmed this as well. They can confirm through the Akkadian tablets, and again, this is some of the oldest or tablets or references showing the first part of the theophoric element, Yahweh's name,
Yes.
Yah. And you can see it all throughout. It's amazing. Matter of fact, maybe after this program we'll show that to you.
Wow.
But it's just amazing the number of names that contain Yah, Yah,
Yes.
Yah. And you know, and I'm not making any speculation per se, because I don't know if we know for sure. But I do think we see a transition with Yah to Yeh.
Yeah.
Between the Akkadian and the Masoretic documents, because within the Akkadian, really all you see is Yah. You don't see it. And just real quickly to note, because some people will say, or the scholars don't know the vowels of Akkadian. That's not right. The scholars do know the vowels of Akkadian. I spoke with a guy from Cambridge, again, the professor
Yes.
from Cambridge.
Yes.
I've received correspondence from other professors on this. They've all agreed that they do know the they do know the vowels within the Akkadian, and the vowels show Yah.
Exactly.
Now it's a different script, and the Akkadian language and the alphabet, and is sort of a wedge form, is the more cuneiform is what it's called. But one of the first symbol, just real quickly, it can take on different sounds. It can be like a Y or an IE, an IU, an IA, or Y in the case in place of the I. But here's the thing, in many of these names, you have another symbol that follows that with an A.
Yes.
And whenever you see the A after this IA, or this one symbol, you know it's Yah.
It's got to be a Y.
It has
Yes.
to be Yah.
Yes.
Not only a Y, a YAH.
Yes.
So the Akkadian confirms. Now most of us, Yahu or Yahoo or something to that. I know I received a correspondence from a professor from the Hebrew University, and he says that it transliterates approximately to YAHW, is
Yes.
how he renders that. So again, just as we see in this Greek Septuagint document, you see the first. So even the Ye, from an academic standpoint, when you go back to the Akkadian, when you go back to the early Septuagint documents, you don't see this. And the Akkadian and the Greek, they're not related. Matter of fact, I will say this real quickly. The professor from Cambridge verified one of the ways they verified the pronunciation of the Akkadian is they've actually found what you would call maybe a Moabite stone, where it has the Akkadian and the Greek.
Yes.
And we know the Greek.
Yes.
So, if we can read Greek, we can confirm the Akkadian. And the Akkadian, again, when you see these Yah, I thought that was a remarkable truth. And it, for me, it shows this Yehovah is nothing but nonsense.
It's extremely important, because the fact when you're looking at something like this, and not just Yehovah, but all the names in modern Hebrew, with the vowel pointing, starting with the Yeh or the Yehu, Yeho, whatever, it makes sense if they're trying to hide the name Yahweh, right? Mm-hmm. That they're using other vowel pointings from Adonai or Elohim. Would it make sense that they're going to vowel point the names that have Yahweh in it as Yahweh? Of course not. But the fact that, like you're saying, you're looking at these things that are 5th century BC, which is more than 1,000 years older, 1,300 years older than the Masoretic text, that all have that. I think it's 13 names from what I've read, that all start with Yah or Yahu. And just one other comment on that, because some people try to say then the name should be Yahu, and then with the last hey, just Yahuwah, which makes no sense. There's no meaning to it. It's an impossibility, even worse than Yehovah.
No, and I think, again, you go to the Greek, and the scholarship shows. And this, by the way, the Akkadian documents do not contain the full name of Yahweh's name.
Yes. It's just the
short form Yah,
exactly,
the first syllable there.
But the Bible does 68 times. We do have this short, so we know what it is. That's you don't have to say, is it Yah? No, we know it's Yah because 68 times it's there. As a matter of fact, I got one quote here. I'll read from Scripture from Isaiah 12. Behold, El is my salvation, Yeshua. I will trust and not be afraid, for my strength and my song is Yahweh. Yea, he has become to me salvation. So, I mean, right there, that's one, but there's 68 times the name is clearly vocalized as Yah. So we don't have to guess what the first syllable is.
Or the other thing too is, even within the Masoretic documents, now some will make the claim that the concept or the theory that they manipulated the first syllable is wrong, because we see Yah within the Hebrew, the Masoretic, the Yah within like Isaiah. You actually see the vowel points of Yah there. But you know, my thinking is it's a possibility still, because these names would begin with Yah, which I think would be a difference. Or you know, we could go on all day long with evidence, and it's just, you know, you've looked into this as long as I have, and the evidence is just overwhelming for Yahweh, and it's overwhelming also against Yehovah. And you know, truthfully, I think there's an agenda there for some of these pushing this Yehovah, and I think as believers we need to be very careful with this. And one of the things that we always should do, whether it's the Tetragrammaton, the name of our Father in heaven, or whatever it is, you know, we need to look at it from multiple references, multiple sources, multiple scholars, multiple experts, multiple teachers. And especially if there's controversy, we really need to look into this. And you know, with Yehovah, there's basically one source. There's no scholarship. And I want to apologize for saying that. I mean, I don't believe anybody teaching this is a scholar or has the credentials to claim to be a scholar. I think this is based on false premise. And the evidence, again, is just overwhelming. So I'm going to sort of let you close, you know, your closing remarks, and but I do want to thank you one more time for coming, for being part of this. It is such a blessing. I mean, you know, I consider you a friend, a fellow minister. You know, it was such a wonderful time spending almost 2 weeks with you in the land of Israel. Got to know your wife and your daughter, and you're a great guy, and you know, and just appreciate you being here and helping us with this.
My pleasure.
So, any closing remarks as far as Yehovah? And
yeah, just the one thing I just like to add in closing is, like I said, in the internet world, all academics have been lost. Because before, if you go back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where would you get a platform to come out with these things? Certainly, it wouldn't be in a congregation or whatever. And you know, you have to have something journalized. You have to have people that are going to support your writing, because it's going to cost thousands of dollars to print a book or whatever, a publisher. Today, anybody, you know, anybody can come out from anywhere, and we joke about, you know, they're down in the basement eating potato chips in their underwear, typing down there. But it really is true that anybody can come out and say anything, and there's really no accountability, because the internet is new, and there's not even laws against this kind of thing. But if people just go back, take the last 10 years aside, and look at the last 2,000 to 3,000 years of academic scholarship, and everywhere, like I said, not 100%, because we don't know, but all the scholarship either says it's Yahweh or some form of Yahweh. I've heard Yahweh here and there, but most of it is Yahweh, but never something like this, never something so nonsensical as Jehovah, like, because the rabbis themselves, the ones who wrote the book, tell us that they purposely put those vowel points in there so that people would not pronounce the name Yahweh.
Matter of fact, I'm going to say this in closing too. Some of these folks who have come to this ministry, they've challenged us on Yahweh and saying it's Yehovah, and I'll always say, okay, beyond this one Karaite Jew, show me one scholar, show me one PhD research paper, show me something that draws the same conclusions from the same information. And to this date, I have had nobody respond.
Zero. Nobody
can respond, because there is none.
Or ask them for one reference before the Masoretics, one reference that could prove it's. We went through how many that show the name Yahweh and we could from thousands of years ago.
And we could go all day long, you know. And that's I don't want to say the sad part about it, but that's the sad part about it, is we could go all day quoting references from scholars, real scholars, scholars that have the credentials to support their position.
And the same ones who are going to tell you the name is Yehovah are going to tell you the earth is flat.
I guess we'll close on that notion there. Well, I'd like to thank you online for watching and being part of this program. And you know, I would encourage you to study these things out, to search them out. If you've heard this before, look at the evidence. And again, I just want to offer our booklet, The Yehovah Deception. Is a phenomenal booklet. It's a great booklet. You're going to learn much from this. And if you're questioning this, or even if you're not, it's probably still a good read for you. But again, thank you for joining, and may Yahweh bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Shattering Traditions. This program is an outreach of Yahweh's Restoration Ministry. For all our materials, including free booklets and the RT magazine, visit our website, yrm.org. Get your copy of the Restoration Study Bible, the book that's changing hearts and minds around the world. Visit store.yrm.org. Keep up to date with ministry news and events by liking us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/YRM. Subscribe to our Shattering Traditions YouTube channel and see all our latest videos. This ministry is only possible by the tithes and offerings of our members and supporters. To donate by phone, call toll-free 1-844-899-6438 or online at donate.yrm.org. Until next week, remember to search the Bible, remove religious baggage, and join our mission to shatter tradition.